Hi, Dr. Chandler. Thank you for being here on the Work Podcast. And I like calling you doctor just because, I feel like you're an expert in this field, but let us know if you just want to be called Chandler.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I'm super. Is this a curse-friendly podcast? I just
Yes,
want
it
to be
is
clear.
for sure.
Awesome.
Yes.
I'm super fucking excited to be here, and you can call me Chandler. I got the name doctor. I mean, that's the only reason I got the degree, let's be honest. And I only make people who only make white people, essentially, or white men, especially. Anyone who talks down to me, they have to call me doctor. Anyone who's not an asshole gets to call me Chandler.
Well, I'm telling Brittany, I feel like you earned it. So, I like calling you doctor
Mhm.
because you've gone through, a lot of schooling and dedication to earn that title. So,
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. It can be hard to feel like that sometimes. And I think the reason that I try to go by my first name, besides any avoidance of actually accepting that I might have done that and receiving praise on it, which I can talk about in therapy, um, the point is that I want people to feel like doctors are relatable. I want people to feel, especially people who look like me, to know that they can be me and for me to feel relatable and accessible to them. And I think that this hierarchy that we have in our society, especially in academia, is extremely harmful and detrimental to people's ability to learn as a community. And so any way that I can start to deconstruct that, um, with people who are open to it, that's a way that I want to be involved in.
But wouldn't then you want, for representation's sake, for people that look like you, that look like us, to know that you are a doctor and that that is achievable, and also you can be normal? You
Of
know, like,
course. Of course. Yeah. I mean, I that's why I put the doctor on my TikTok and I never dress up there. And my first viral video was in a bonnet. Um,
can we learn more about you? Can you share your origin story, where you're from, and anywhere you want to take that?
of course. Yeah. Buckle up. Feel free to cut me off. I do have a Sagittarius in the third house. So things tend to get wordy for me. Um, so I am Dr. Chandler Purity. I'm an intersectional climate scientist and mystic. I never wanted to be a doctor. A Pisces moon, so I consider myself a creative. And unfortunately, when you live in this capitalistic world, I found out at a young age. Those are micros, I'm sorry. I found out at a young age that we were going to need money, which seems like a scam, right? And I stand by that it is a scam.
It is a
And
scam.
so I was like, cool, cheat code. I'm going to become a doctor. I thought I was going to be a medical doctor. My heart is way too soft for that. Um, Ended up finding that out the hard way. But I had always been interested in science. I am biracial and I grew up around mostly my mom's family, and she's white, so lots of farms. I've always been into animals, that Pisces moon again. And I really had watched exclusively Animal Planet and Discovery Channel because I was the oldest child. And, parents have aspirations. You get me, Britt. You
yeah.
feel me. Yeah. They have aspirations for us, right? And so that's all I was allowed to watch. And I loved the Crocodile Hunter. I stand by Steve Irwin, whatever connection he had. He was a Pisces. So
Mhm.
that we have
Was
that.
he really?
Obviously he was a Pisces. And yes,
Mm,
he was
Love the
really.
water.
But
mm.
you know what I mean? Who's gonna pick up a snake and kiss it on the mouth? That's some Pisces behavior. And so I'd watched all of these shows hours and hours because I've always been real into TV. And I'd seen scientist after scientist, including one white man who had his moniker under his title was self-proclaimed bubbleologist. It's during
Uh-huh.
Shark Week, but what confidence? And I, throughout all of that, I never knew that I could be a scientist. It just didn't fucking click for me. And I'm smart, okay? But that's the thing with representation and expansion is that it's really hard to do it without seeing an example of it. And so I ended up going to Howard University because they paid me the most money. And when I went on a school visit there, I went to a Q party, and
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about, Britt. But
Yeah.
my little Catholic school self was shook. I said, "Ooh, I like that." Oh yeah, and I'd gone to Catholic school, obviously. So I go to Howard University, and am a biology major. I'm planning on being a doctor. I was going to do their accelerated program to become an MD. And then obviously like a week, it was like freshman week. And I was like, there's no way in hell I'm going to study extra. I have a lot of partying to focus on. So I just assumed I was going to be a doctor. And in my first biology lab, there was a sign on the wall, and I had no idea what it said except for, do you want to make $30,000? And I said, I need money to live. So yeah, I'd love that. And I didn't read the fine print, and I had signed up to be in an environmental science research program at the university. So from my freshman year until my senior year, I participated in ecological research. So ecology is the study of living things and their interactions. I studied, you know, like interactions between bugs and plants. I studied little worms that live in the ocean. I spent a summer in Davis, California, chasing butterflies around with a butterfly net. Like that, I had to do that every day. I made like $7,000 for like,
So cool.
8 weeks. Fantastic. And somewhere along those lines, my contract also stipulated that I applied to a PhD program. And so I ended up doing that because I didn't have a lot of direction in my life, and I have a lot of faith, we'll say. I also have a trine in my birth chart, so shit just works out. I just go with the flow, things are fine. So I kind of like stumbled into a PhD program, and I like for people to be aware of how dangerous the gifted and talented into like PhD pipeline is, because like, you show a little bit of promise in middle school, and it's just like things happen fast. So I go to do my PhD at UC San Diego in plant community ecology, and I studied the influence of invasive plants that were brought here to California on the blankets of Spanish colonizers, how those invasive plants have basically taken over the state, and what they do not only to our native plants, but also to our fire frequency. So studying fire in California under our increasingly extreme conditions that we're expecting because of climate change, right? So global warming, we used to say, terrible branding, but with climate change here in Southern California, what we're expecting is, instead of, we have a drought every summer and we have rain in the winter, and we're supposed to get like the same amount of drought and the same amount of rain every year. And what's happening is that our cycles are getting more extreme. So we'll have like, we're in the middle of another like 1,000-year drought. It's been like 3 or 4 years in California. And we had another 1,000-year drought when I was in grad school 4 years ago. And in the interim between these droughts, instead of getting our regular amount of rain, we get like 4 times the amount of rain. And that so we are either dealing with fires or like mudslides. And a lot of it can be traced back to this plant that was introduced through colonial practices. And so, yeah, I did my PhD there. I had a really terrible time race-wise, and just the environment of academia is abusive. The environment of a PhD program is even more abusive. In my department, I think mine was the only year that didn't have a unaliving of a graduate student.
Oh my gosh.
And before that, it was like a couple times, like 1 or 2 a year. And these are like not even the people of color. Like, unfortunately, people of color, in my experience, were more likely to leave the program when they were getting to that point, or were just had a higher tolerance for the bullshit, unfortunately, because of a life of trauma. But it was true that like almost all of my peers were suicidal at the time. My Black peers anyways. And so I am, in this environment, and I had left my Catholic faith a long time ago. Okay, I'm smart. I picked up on all the hypocrisy all during middle school, high school, everything I learned. And I was kind of floating, and I really needed direction, and I really needed like something. I needed something. And as a scientist, I'm seeing the behind the scenes of science, and like respectfully, like I ain't no Trump or anything, but like I don't be trusting these scientists, not in the sense of like I think they're out to get us, in the sense that they have an unhealthy sense of ego. And it's very easy to make mistakes, like human error, and it's very hard for white men to admit those mistakes. And as someone who's doing my own science, like I'm doing my best, I'm doing good science, it's, you know, peer approved by the public, or peer approved by my peers in the field and published. And still I'm like, I don't want anyone to see my data. Like, it's embarrassing. Like, it's kind of scary because there's no such thing as doing something perfectly. And I think that like science likes to pretend that that's possible. So I got my first tarot deck, and it was a slippery fucking slope from there. Um, yeah, so that's, I guess, a little bit about me. After I graduated, I taught at the university for 3 years in a number of different departments. I teach climate change courses, I teach environmental studies courses, African American studies courses, all that kind of thing. And I burnt out from teaching, and I decided that it would be easier to teach from home. And so I joined TikTok, and I went viral on my bonnet. And then, you know, here we are.
What, can you name that plant? Do you know off the top of your head the name of the plant that is responsible for the invasive species plant?
Yeah. It's Bromus madridensis. So the name, the name tells you where it's from, Madrid. Brom meaning grass, brome grass. It's a type of grass. Madridensis being grass of Madrid. It is a red grass. If you are Californian and you want to find it, generally speaking, this is true in Southern California. I can't vouch for all of California. It's a big ass state and there's a fuck ton of plants here. But in Southern California, generally speaking, we don't have any single blade grasses. We only have native bunch grasses. So a native bunch grass is going to be like 50, 100, you know, whatever, shoots shooting out from like one spot on the ground. And those are perennial grasses, so that even when the top dies off, the root remains alive and it can survive into the next year. The Bromus madridensis grass is an annual grass. So it's the type of grass where you're only going to see it coming up like one shoot at a time. And sometimes the seeds heads of the grass can have a little bit of a red tinge to it. Bromus madridensis is the main one that I focused on, but there's a whole suite of grasses. Avena fatua, there's like a whole number of introduced grasses from Spain. But Bromus madridensis now covers, I don't know, like 2/3 of the state, from Northern California all the way down to Southern California. And our native plants, right, they're built for our drought and rain seasons, right? They're built for like, I'm not going to get any rain for 8 months. I'm going to get a lot of rain for 4 months. And that means that they grow very slowly. So we have a lot of woody plants. California used to be full of flowers because we had so many native flowers. And here, even still, you know, you'll see the influencers with the poppy fields and things like that. But like the whole state used to be just covered in flowers, especially during that time of year. And so we're used to having kind of like these woody things and these flowers, and the flowers live and die. That's good. They're supposed to be there. The shrubs grow very slowly, but they last a very long time. That's good. They're still alive. The invasive grasses, however, they grow much faster, which because they come from an environment where they were constrained by basically they had like a predator there. And so it wasn't that they couldn't deal with the weather. It's just that they had a bug that was always up their ass. And when they came here, the bug was gone and they could do whatever the fuck they wanted. So those grasses, they like bloom really early in the season, which means they take up all the resources from the other things, and then they die earliest in the season too. And the problem with that is that they're because they grow so fast, they have a lot of nitrogen. And the things that grow slow have a lot of carbon. And nitrogen is much more flammable than carbon. And so we have this problem where usually we wouldn't have this much like kindling in our system, right? We're supposed to have fire, but we're not supposed to have this much kindling. We're supposed to have the shrubs, which burn slower. That slows down the rate of the fire. They burn hotter, but they burn slower, and they're easier to constrain. And because all of these grasses are there, they like light like that, and then they catch the wind and they spread faster than anything we've ever seen. And then because they're invasive, as soon as an area has been burned, it's like also the perfect environment for them to come back to. So it was pretty grim, my findings from the study, right? We thought that maybe a long drought would kill all of the grasses because they need water, because they grow fast, right? So they need resources fast. And we thought if they have to go without water for 3 years, then surely we'll be free of this problem. And the grasses are smarter than we thought they were. Plant intelligence is incredible. And they have the ability, the seeds to, it's called seed banking, where the seeds basically like, test the weather every year. And depending on the conditions, that depends on the number of seeds that will germinate. And so when there's poor conditions, only about like 1 or 2, maybe 10% of the seeds will germinate, and the other 90% will just wait. And that's what happened. They waited. And we got a super heavy rainfall year in my last year of my PhD. And I went out there to, find out what happened. And all during the drought, right? Like at my work site, I could walk and see my feet. I could see the ground. I could see the dirt. I could see if there were snakes. There were no snakes. It was good. As soon as I came back after this year of rain, the invasive plant material came up to my chest everywhere, and I'm 6 foot tall. So it had just waited, and it all came back. And then turns out, surprise, we had a pretty bad fire year in 2017.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that was my first project, and also kind of my introduction to history and colonialism and that kind of influence on the problems that we're dealing with ecologically now.
Whoa.
I was watching 60 Minutes about the hurricane that just passed through Florida, Hurricane Ida. And
Mhm.
what you're talking about is also what they faced. Because of overdevelopment on the coastline, they got rid of all the mangroves that naturally, like, um, you know, filter out the water and stop the flooding. But because they're not there, the coasts now are flooded. And there's this one township in Florida where actually it was a white man who realized this and replanted those native mangroves, and they didn't actually have problems with flooding. So, like, clearly the solution is to replant those native plants. So,
Mhm.
then, like, I know this goes into the Harry Potter thing that I want to ask you about the the three-headed dog, but like, why don't they just do that?
Yeah. Great question. Yeah, so certainly when it comes to solutions, we are thinking replanting native plants, specifically plants that perform the same function and operate, native plants that operate on a similar timeline, right? So a native plant that can also germinate early and kind of help with that. So we do need to focus on replanting native plants. We also need to focus on removing some of the invasive plant material. The problem with why we haven't done that is because in the Western world, in the white world, we have a belief that that humans are bad for nature, right? When you go to campsites, right, it's like leave no trace, which is good. Obviously, I'm not telling you to litter, but this idea that nature is good on its own, it doesn't need us, right? And that is obviously not the case. We are animals just like any other animal, and we have a role that we play in nature. And Indigenous peoples played this role, and they were a keystone species, like a keystone group. A keystone species in ecology is a species that basically like its function, all other species in the ecosystem rely on its function. And our example of that is the Yellowstone wolves. When Yellowstone was getting started, there were like farmers nearby and they were like, I got cows. Cows are my money. Wolves are eating my cows. And so the white people were like, fine, we'll get rid of the wolves. And guess what? You can't just get rid of the wolves because the wolves play a role in that society. And getting rid of the wolves affected the deer, it affected the birds, it affected everything down to the water quality of the like streams and rivers, just removing that one species. So it's really hard because we live in a world where we're not supposed to interact with the environment, right? Because most Western people are harmful when we come into the environment. But we have to remember that Indigenous people, although they safeguard, I believe they have like 10% of the land in the world and they safeguard 80% of the biodiversity. And in fact, we know from foragers that when you go to a plant and you harvest just a little bit, it allows the plant to grow even more. And then you get more food, and that plants react well to being, sometimes like clipped and interacted with, essentially. So until we can get out of that idea that we are separate from nature, I don't know how we will tackle this. I think we're working towards that, but replanting native plants and taking out plants that aren't native, that requires time. This is what we're talking about when we talk about land stewardship. We have to be stewards to the land. We are responsible. I mean, not us, none of us here, but our society is responsible for these plants being here. And so we also should be playing a role personally in their removal. Yes.
When I think about how we're taught that we're separate from nature, and I thought about this when you said, we are animals, and I had a flashback of my mom saying that, telling me that we weren't animals, and it's this very Christian belief. That we are separate from and above, right? It's speciesism, right? It's like we are separate from and better than and above. And so everything should always come to our care first and our comfort first.
Yes.
And so I would love to see if you're comfortable speaking to the effects of white supremacy in a more blatant way on,
I love it.
Right, on our ecosystems.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm obsessed, and that leads perfectly into the last bit of Laura's question, and I'll just get right into the
That's
video
how I found you.
that.
Well, is that the one that you went viral on?
The bonnet one has white supremacy.
Yeah, well,
and colonialism.
I found Dr. Chandler's video about climate change because she was speaking about the three-headed dog in Harry Potter, and I was like, this is fucking brilliant. They should just teach this. You should teach this to every kid, every person on the planet. So here you go.
Here it is. Yeah. So this is a metaphor, I guess, or analogy. I still don't know what the difference is. Simile, maybe, I don't know. For like basically all of climate change. I think that climate change is one of those things, and I've read it in climate change textbooks that I've taught out of, that's like the public just like, it's too complex to communicate to the public, like people just don't understand. And then we kind of tell people that it's a problem without necessarily explaining like what it is, how it came to be, and how they can be part of the solution. And I think that's what's leading to a lot of climate anxiety and climate paralysis with folks, is like scientists are just like, CO2 is going up, you're gonna die, there's nothing we can do, recycle. And like, that's a terrible, because most people aren't getting like the super in-depth thing. You have to go out of your way. And in my personal experience, there are, at least at the time, there was kind of a distinct like racial divide. So I had like never even heard of anyone say climate change for real when I was at Howard. And I come to San Diego with all these white people, and they're like, oh my God, like the seals, the birds and all this kind of thing. And for a long time, it felt to me like a white people problem. And for a long time, I mean, until I had been teaching already with my PhD for about a year and a half. That's when I decided that I should care about climate change and that it wasn't a white people problem. And I think that that's like a relatable thing for people. I feel like this is especially, you know, around like George Floyd, like people are getting shot in the street. Like, I think to me, that's a more pressing issue than like our climate issue. It felt like something that you had to have the privilege of not having other issues to be able to focus on. So in my classes, this is the metaphor that I chose to teach them, and it does use Harry Potter because I'm a millennial. So Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, that is the first Harry Potter book, and their goal is to like get the Sorcerer's Stone. That's what they want. In this metaphor, the Sorcerer's Stone is going to be the cure for climate change, the answer, the truth. And the Sorcerer's Stone is kept under a padlock that has a three-headed dog on top of it. We remember this massive three-headed dog. I love big dogs, including that one. I think I could connect with him. I stand by that. And let's say that, like, you know, the scientists, we're Ron, Hermione, and actually I'm Hermione. Ron and Ron and Harry are white male scientists, and that just works for me, which actually makes sense because I feel like in the movie they were like, we should do it this way, and Hermione's like, everyone has to listen to me all the time because I'm always right, and she was.
Yeah.
Right. So we have, you know, our climate change answer is under there, and the three-headed dog. And the three-headed dog, each of the heads represents a different root of climate change. So how did climate change come to be? Right? I think that I'm lazy. And so I don't want to spend all my time picking at all of the symptoms and consequences of climate change. I would rather dig around and find the root and start hacking at that, right? And so the three heads of the three-headed dog that is keeping us from addressing climate change issues, we have capitalism, we have colonialism, and we have white supremacy, okay? These are the things that created climate change, right? Capitalism created climate change because you cannot exploit land without exploiting labor and people, right? How do we live in a world that has this such rampant version of capitalism? It's because people are now working 4 jobs, 80-hour weeks. It's because of the stolen labor from enslaved people. The ability to achieve this level of productivity that is year-round, 24/7, all the time, is not found in nature. It's not natural, and it relies on exploiting people and land. Until we can learn to value people over profit, we will never have climate change solution, right? We can't continue to take, and expect there to not be consequences. So capitalism is the first head. The second head is colonialism. Colonialism, of course, created climate change largely through the introduction of non-native plants, the introduction of invasive plants. I was an invasive plant like specialist in grad school, and there's all of this research around it. There's an entire journal around invasive plants, and nobody fucking talks about how those plants got to be invasive. Who brought them? Who didn't wash their blankets before they went on a 4-month boat ride? Jesus Christ, that is concerning on its own, right? Like, that's my main concern is like, you didn't wash them before and then you brought them all the way to California. Like, anyways. So colonialism, and of course, not only are they bringing their plants, but also bringing their religion as well. And for most indigenous communities around the world, their nature practices, their relationship to the environment it's inextricably bound to their religion, or not religion, their spirituality, right? And so when you come in and remove the culture without the understanding that most indigenous cultures are rich with natural knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, right? Without even having textbooks, and they have generations, thousands of years of experience and knowledge, and not all of that is kept separate. None of it is kept separate from songs, stories, all of this kind of thing. And when you remove all of that, you take the ecological knowledge away with it. So colonialism, out of here. And the third is white supremacy. So this is always a fun one. White supremacy certainly kind of drove colonialism, and I don't think it drove colonialism and capitalism, but it certainly drove the genocide of the indigenous people. So unfortunately, our environmentalism here in the United States is, according to the men who created our modern movement, Teddy Roosevelt and co. So we're talking Teddy Roosevelt, we're talking John Muir, Madison Grant. These are all old white men who are John Muir, right? He has the Muir Woods. Madison Grant is considered the father of conservation and management. And these are essentially, at least in the United States, these are the forefathers of like valuing the environment. And so you're like, cool, that's good. It's not good. It's very bad. So the reason that they wanted to protect environmental space, to protect natural spaces, wild spaces, which that's another whole conversation. But the reason they wanted to protect them was to protect those spaces from people of color who they considered to be savages, right? So you, Britt, you mentioned how your mom said we're not animals, and how that ties into this kind of hierarchy that's built by our society. And when, you know, like white people would talk about, they would call animals, they would also call Black people animals, they would call, indigenous people animals. And this idea that they had was that when you live close to nature, because we're supposed to be separate from it, or better, when you live close to nature, you cannot be objective in how that nature should be exploited, used, really. And so they thoroughly believed that the indigenous peoples were running around. They had no idea what they were doing. They were causing harm to the environment. And that because, I forgot to say, they decided that white people were the most advanced. The Nordic race was the most advanced because they came from such a shitty place and they had survived, right? You can't, like, what can you grow in the Nordic area? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Traumatized people is what you can grow there.
that's
Traumatized
exactly what
people.
they grew there, a full crop of traumatized people. And so their logic is, okay, we came from the worst place. That means we are the most evolved. And anyone who comes from a place that has lots of resources is least evolved. And we know from Charles Darwin that when you're least evolved, you eventually head towards extinction. So since these people are going to die anyways, we might as well just help them out on that. And we're going to accelerate that because we don't want them to destroy the land that our kids and our grandkids are going to need. So unfortunately, that is the basis of all of our modern environmental action. And you continue to see this, right? Because when we look at the consequences of capitalism, the pollution, when we look at the consequences of climate change, they are happening in communities of color. They're happening in communities in the global South. They're happening in low-income communities. They're happening to Black and Brown people all over the world. And why? It has been happening for a very long time, and still the leading environmentalists, right, they're focused on they're not focused on those people that are suffering the most. Sorry, I got a little distracted. So I forgot to close out the analogy. So our three heads: capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy. Those are the things that created the climate change and the world that we live in. And the Ron and Harry, they're white scientists, they're standing outside the door. And every time we send someone in to get the answer, they get fucking murdered, like blood spurting everywhere. And Ron and Harry are like, you know what? I think that it's actually like the fart of the dog that's killing everyone. I think it's like a noxious fart, right? Because the fart of the dog is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is nothing but the byproduct of capitalism, colonialism, and white supremacy. Carbon dioxide doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from We all have to drive our cars so we can get to work. We have to work and we have to wear suits because we live in a capitalist country that is based on like white supremacist ideals. Um, we can't, live with nature because that doesn't fit our like Christian white supremacist ideals. So this carbon dioxide is simply the byproduct of these systems, and scientists are focusing on the byproduct of the systems
Barbie.
because they can't see the system, right? I'm gonna be nice today because it's early. I'm not gonna accuse them of being intentionally harmful, but I do know in my experience that they are so woefully blind to
Mm-hmm.
the fact that to their positionality in society. And when you can't see that you're on the top of something, you have no idea what's going on underneath, right? And as someone who's very much towards the bottom of the pile, the social hierarchy, it was clear to me that these are the things that are causing climate change, and that to focus on reducing CO2, to focus on making the fart smell less of the dog, is to continue capitalism, colonialism, and white supremacy and somehow try to take away the consequences. We still want to exploit people. We still want white people to be on top, right? We still want only one type of relation to the world, one type of religion, at least in this country, to be acceptable. Um, but we would like to have no consequences for that. We would like to not have to address the harms done by these systems. And I just don't think that's fucking possible. I don't think that's possible at all. And as you mentioned, Laura, that you felt TikTok is very Aquarian, very of the Aquarian age. People are starting to put these pieces together. People are starting to connect the fact that capitalism is the root of all evil. I love that. More and more people that find out about that, I think that's fantastic. People are starting to understand, right? Like one of my questions is, it's not, I mean, it's a question, you guys can try to answer it, but what kind of world would we live in if the first time we had a Black or brown child suffer from asthma because of pollution in their area? Because remember, like these power plants, they're set intentionally far apart from white spaces. And intentionally people of color are kind of cordoned off to move there. So what would happen if the first time, because we've known about this for a long time, first time a child of color popped up with asthma, the entire society, the rich white people, everybody said, absolutely not. That is not okay. We cannot stand for that. But we didn't say that. We said nothing, right? And with what we have, there's child labor issues around, especially cobalt, and I believe lithium as well for like electronic car batteries. We have facts that there are children dying in mines in Congo for the stuff that we need to make like iPhones. Why is that okay? You know what I'm saying? And I think that until we can start to undo and address this culture that we've built, we're not going to be able to dismantle climate change, because climate change is a reflection of our culture. And it's both encouraging and discouraging, right? For me, it's encouraging because I believe that anyone who is fighting for the autonomy, the rights, the right to live, equal rights, I believe that every single one of those people is also fighting for the climate. Because when we can hopefully one day arrive that at the conclusion that we are all equal, it will be harder. It'll be harder to continue our culture the way it's gone. But yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's something you said, like hit another idea nerve, which is that you said capitalism is the root of all evil.
Mm-hmm.
And we've heard the phrase money is the root of all evil, which always
Mm-hmm.
irks me because the actual phrase is the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money is the root of all evil.
Mm.
And so if you were to take away the love of money and just make it that money, then people now feel guilty about having money and having enough and having resources. And so
Mm-hmm.
then all the resources can go to those who feel they have a right to it.
Right.
for whatever reason. And
Right.
so, and who are heading and pushing the capitalist agenda.
Yeah.
That's it. I just wanted to say
Yeah. No, I
that.
love that. And I love that one, that you know the proper phrase, because I did not, the love of money. And
Mhm.
I like that you said that, because whereas like I believe capitalism and money is the root of all evil, I believe that love is the answer. And that is because capitalism, okay, so my belief is that like you have to be able to love yourself, which is like why I got into spirituality. You have to be able to love yourself before you can love other people, any other people, because our, in my opinion, like our impressions and relationships with others are simply a reflection of ourselves, right? Everyone is a reflection of us. And so I can't see beauty in you if I can't see beauty in me. Capitalism robs us of our base level of love, self-love, right? Why do I have to earn the right to be alive?
Mm.
Why do I have to earn food, shelter, and water? Why am I not worth that? Right? To participate in that system is to say I'm not worthy. I mean, we have no choice but to participate in it, but that's what it says. I'm not worthy of being alive. I have to earn the right to be alive. And that's not even touching on love, right? And that makes us competitive with one another. It makes us individualistic. It's hard to break out of that. Um, I do believe that with self-love, we can like, that can have ripple out effects, and it can help us break free of capitalism, right? Because the antidote to capitalism is community. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And in this like high-paced world, like people don't have time to build community. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like how I know like 3 of my neighbors, and there's way more people that I should know. And just from the 3 that I know, like I got some chocolate cakes the other day. Like I gave her like a house plant. Sometimes, we'll go out to dinner together. They have their own garden. They'll bring stuff. I have my own garden. I give them passion fruit. Um, I give them like 20 pounds. I had to tell me to stop. I was giving them like 20 pounds a week because I have this huge vine in my house. But it's just like, and I'm the type of person that I'm always going to give if I have extra of something, and that's how I was raised. And I always have enough. But I think that capitalism convinces a lot of people that that's not safe to do and to be. Because the true answer is like, if we shut off money right now and could get people to like not buy into it, there's currently enough of everything for everyone right now. Maybe some people don't need 10 bedrooms. Maybe some people don't need 10 cars. Maybe some people don't need 10, you know what I mean? And we don't even need to use everything at the same time either. Like I can have one thing and still share that with my friends and with my community. But we have to like feel safe to love to be able to do that. And I think that if we ever hope to be able to love our planet, right? Because I'm forgetting the terms, but there's like, I think it's like anthrocentric and like, I'm not going to know the terms, but it's basically taking our society from a hierarchy to where like everything has the same amount of rights and autonomy. And that means everything, right? I think it's Peru, somewhere in South America, they gave the planet Earth autonomy legally, like on there officially as a government. And so we have to be able to know that the land is its own thing. It can make its own choices. We have to know that the animals are their own thing. They can make their own choices. And we have to know that women are their own thing and they can make their own choices. We have to know that
Wow.
people of color are their own thing. We have to know that people with disabilities are their own thing and make their own choices. We have to know that queer people are their own and can make their own choices. And we have to be able to respect that. And one thing that really irks me is, as a human species, we're embarrassing. This is an embarrassing show, okay? I've read books about how they say that like the aliens like laugh at us. They're like, but like in a way that's like kind of scary. They're like, wow, super unhinged. And this idea that why would aliens come here when we can't even get along with each other, right? because we're all the same species. Um, thank you, Trash Man. So loud. Um, what was I saying? Because we're all the same. Yes. So my feeling is it's like the most white thing in the world that we have all of these issues amongst humans, and we decide that the best way to spend our resources. Nope. Still happening. Is it very loud for you? It's very loud for me.
I can hear it. It's not very loud.
I hear you.
Okay, cool.
No.
Um, that one was loud.
I feel like that's a metaphor for what
I think
Right?
so. I think it is. I really think it is.
Well, I don't know if you've
Like,
heard those.
there's only one dumpster back there. So I'm just like confused as to the length of this.
Have you seen those TikTok videos? It's two black women, I forget their names, where they talk about communal love and how communal love is actually the antidote to capitalism and white supremacy, and how our capitalistic white supremacist culture puts so much of the emphasis on romantic love for two people. Whereas if we all were invested in communal love, like community, that's harder to break down when it's like a group of people. And if you think about a community, like you need one lawnmower, one like snow blower. We have that here where I live. Like one person can buy the thing and everyone shares it and we all share it. And that's like counterintuitive to capitalism. So they were saying like in our individualistic society, like we're so focused on like putting all of our needs onto one person versus like what you were saying about community and sharing your resources. And also capitalism makes us think that there's not enough of anything, like
Mhm.
scarcity mindset, where what you just said, like if we all just shut money down now and we
Yes.
all just shared our resources, like we would see that we actually don't need money
No.
at all.
No.
Like sharing, barter system.
Yes. Absolutely. And I
Funny
love that
how
you said scarcity mindset because Britt, you know exactly where that came from because you called it out. Where did they get the scarcity mindset? From fucking living in that Nordic food desert,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
I that's my theory is that it evolved from there and their idea that all of the world was like that, you know, and that people who had an abundance mindset, who came from abundance, had more freedom and ability
Mhm.
with love.
Milagros Phillips says that. She talks about that. Yeah.
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 Yeah, she believes it was passed down epigenetically through their ancestors.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then like unfortunately the whole world had to suffer for it.
Right. Yeah. It is hard that sometimes, I don't know. I mean, I think obviously everything happens for a reason, and who are we to know what the point of this whole cycle is? Um, but I think about like, what if I lived in a world where I didn't have anything to complain about? And I would be fucking miserable. So to a certain extent, I'm like thrilled to have this particular issue, you know? And like when I first started looking into it, like I didn't think I would be like all talking shit about white people, but like that's what it is. And like that was also a pleasant surprise for me. So at the very least, like I'm grateful for that. Um, but yeah, to close out my thought from the fucking trash can, it's just very strange to me. I think that if we're ever going to hope to undo our hierarchy, we have to start within our own species. That's how I feel. I feel like we need to start in our own house. We need to get our own house in order, right? We're out here. We don't have gender equality in this country, right? And we're out here like measuring dolphins' business. Like maybe leave dolphins alone
Mhm.
until like we can stop being homophobic as a species. Do you know what I'm saying? That's
Yes.
how I feel because animals are intelligent, they're smart, and like this idea of like what can we do to support them? Like we can be less. we can we can just be less and they'll do better. You know what I'm saying? But it is weird to me that we would pour all of our resources into animals, especially when we have problems in our own community, and especially not to spend that money on solving the problems in our own community,
Mm.
Yeah, you
right?
said that in one of the videos actually, where you said people are more likely to save dogs and cats than humans. Like,
Mhm.
Hmm.
wouldn't be surprised that like a person wouldn't help you, but they would help the animal. And I
Mhm.
think a lot about that with like, I know you have a thing with vegans and like people who are so hyper focused on like the rainforest and not the
Yes.
actual people in the rainforest.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is my main beef with environmentalists, ecologists, even, right? Because ecology is the study of everything and how it's connected. So, how can you not understand that people are connected to the natural environment that we evolved in? So strange to me. Um, but yeah, we are. I'm so sorry. I lost my train of thought again.
It's
You
okay.
said something wonderful, and I wrote perfect. I wrote that it was perfect, but not what I wanted to say.
It's totally cool.
Yes.
Um,
Oh
so
my
let's
God.
talk about the pickle in the jar thing.
Sure. Yeah.
So climate change. Some
Yes.
people, so I noticed back in the spring, there were these like NASA scientists who chained themselves to the banks and they were like, oh my God, the world is dying and this very doom and gloom, like doomsday kind of thing. And then everyone panics. But you came on, you were kind of like, everybody's like chill the fuck out. Like it's been going on for years. So for those people who are listening who are like, kind of like, well, we can't do anything. We're just gonna all die. And you gave a pickle in the jar analogy. Do you mind sharing like how can we keep being hopeful?
Yeah. So for one thing, like my beef, more of my beef with those white scientists is like, why is it urgent now? It's urgent now because I mean, like air conditioning, heating. Oh my fucking God. I have to close this window. I cannot do this for one more moment. Jesus fucking Christ. I can still hear it, but it's less. It sounds so fucking loud to me because this microphone is like,
It
yeah,
picks up everything.
yeah.
I mean, it
Okay.
literally is like a metaphor for what we're talking about, which I think is hilarious.
I mean, it's true. And even like these sounds, because so like the sounds of our cars, the sounds of electricity, the sounds of obviously that truck, those are disruptive to animals and especially to birds' ability to like communicate with one another.
Mhm,
And music is not,
mhm.
so music, voices, talking to plants, singing, even like Cardi B, like that doesn't have the same effect as these kinds of technological and mechanical sounds that we have. So sound can actually be really good for the environment, but these kinds of sounds actually even like push fish away from the coast and stuff. Um,
Hmm.
so yes, I was complaining about white men. Yeah, I have a problem with their sense of urgency. They're urgent now because the reason we've been able to ignore climate change while other countries have been dealing with it for decades, centuries even, right? Because we have to remember, I guess the first climate change happened in the 1500s when so many indigenous people were killed that the global temperature went down. We had global cooling because there was many new plants that were that grew and overgrown. Basically, the whole continent was overgrown because so many indigenous people were murdered. And so people who have been separate from our shit show have been dealing with these consequences for hundreds of years. Um, and the reason that we've been able to protect ourselves for so long is because we went into other people's countries, took all of their fucking resources and energy, and we use the things that we stole to keep us comfortable and to protect us. Because of that, we've only just started this summer everyone's like, oh my God, climate change is real, it's so hot, my AC won't even go all the way down. It's like, oh, poor you. I mean, poor me, poor everyone. That was a hard thing to deal with, but at the same time, like we've we've been insulated from this problem for so long, and it just makes me so angry to see people be like, it's a problem now, we need to act now. Where were you? Where have you been? And so in terms of making sure that people feel that there is something to be done and that it's worth taking a shot at it, right? We miss 100% of the shots we don't take, period, right? The answer to climate change could be like in glitter. It could be a TikTok dance. Like, I don't know what it is, but like we're going to need to throw like every idea possible, and we're going to need to try everything out, and there's no wrong way to try to address a situation and a culture that is so thoroughly embedded into our whole society. And when it comes to loosening the pickle jar, something that I feel that I have to remind people, especially in the Western world, and this is because of the Christian religion, is that life is more than just your one lived life, right? Um, and whether or not you believe that your soul can come and go, the fact is that your lineage, your ancestry, I mean, what we usually like to think of in terms of 7 generations. Um, and as far as climate change, let's think about how many generations it took to get us into this mess, right? Starting from the 1500s up until now, that's 500 years, right? That's a long time. How long have Indigenous people been on this continent? 10,000 years. That's much longer. 60,000 years to some estimates, right? That's much longer. And so I think that in a Western world where we only live a single life and where history starts and ends with Rome, okay, weird point to like start and get it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what everyone's like, yeah, like back in the day, it's like, that wasn't that far back. Like, you guys are weird, you know? Um, and just from this one place. So when I talk to these people, like the way their minds, their worldview is set up is that the world started when we started exploiting people. It's the only way things have been done. Anyone who was living a closer to nature life was fucking miserable. Everything we've done has made our lives better, even though we have the highest rates of depression and mental illness ever of any other society. And I've never seen anything change. So like, I don't think anything will change. Right. Um, and so, yeah, we got to work on that. We got to work on that because this took so many generations to create. It's going to take us at least a few generations to get it handled, right? And if we have to understand that in any type of activism, you may never see the results of your work in your lifetime. And that's okay because you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for your kids or for your friends' kids for the next generation, right? And so like with it's you can think of it more as like your work in this lifetime will be loosening the pickle jar for future generations. And it might be easier for them, but it will be because you loosen the pickle jar. And everyone knows that's the hardest step. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that loosening it is the hardest step. And it feels like you're doing nothing, but it is benefiting people down the line. So we have to remember that, and this is a thing, societies that believe in reincarnation have a healthier relationship to nature because they understand that their actions have longer consequences, right, than just this one lifetime. So because the Christian society has one life and one death, we don't have that same relationship to land. So yeah, just do any little part that you can. My little part, I hope and dream that like the next generation, they will start climate change studies and classes. First of all, I hope everybody's going to have to do it. I hope that schools, I don't let me get into that because I'm going to be like, yes, schools will be free. College will be free.
Healthcare.
Exactly. Obviously, clearly,
I mean, like
you get it.
you talk all the time about how you're a Pisces moon and you're kind of delusional, but I think we need to be delusional at this point. Like we need to
Mhm.
just dream big and put it out there because like who knows? Thank you for being on our podcast, Dr. Chandler.
Thank you.
Thank